The webinar here.
Mm-hmm.
Recording. Okay, there we go. Okay, welcome everybody. This is our very first webinar that we've done as a Stittsville team. And I want to thank everybody who's signed up to join us here. Today we are talking about revitalizing Stittsville Main Street. Before we started, I want to just go over some of the technical aspects of this webinar. Well, first of all, I'm Councillor Glen Gower, Councillor for Stittsville. And I'll introduce our panelists here on the call in just a few moments. But from a technical point of view, if you're on the desktop, so if you're on your laptop or desktop for this call, up in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little thing you can toggle between speaker view and gallery view. And for this call, it's best if you are in gallery view. And that way you'll see all of us on the screen at the same time. So that'll just work better. I am going to be sharing a deck in just a few minutes, but that'll come up automatically. Only the three panelists that you see on the screen right now, we're the only ones who can talk. Everybody else is muted, and you're listening in as an audience. But we do want to make this interactive. So if you put your mouse over the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says Q&A, which is a tool that you can use to send us any questions that you have over the course of the call. So you just type that in, and Chelsea, who's on the screen, is going to be keeping an eye on those questions, and we'll be sharing some of your questions with that as we go. The other thing is this is the first webinar we're doing, so everyone tuning in, you're kind of our guinea pigs here, and we're all crossing our fingers that our internet connections are going to work. And all three of us on the panel today, we all have kids at home, and quite likely we get interrupted during it. But just like everybody else who's working from a home office, that's the reality now. We'll just keep going. So hopefully this works. So far, so good. Probably a good point now. I want to give my co-panelists here a chance to say hello and introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Chelsea? Chelsea, how are you?
Hey, I am good. So thank you everyone for joining us. I just really quickly want to speak to some of the comments in the chat about how to find the gallery view. I believe it's like 4 squares beside each other in the top right corner, and that will allow you to switch between speaker view and gallery view. So I work with Councillor Gower, started when he was elected in December 2018. And just a little bit of background about my role when it comes to this project. Basically, I'm just helping to coordinate everything. Pre-COVID-19, I was helping with organizing in-person community workshops and meeting with local businesses and people in the community, making sure that everyone was aware about of this project. So now we're adapting and changing things in our online format, but I'm hoping to pull together some of the feedback from the community, and we'll speak to that a little bit later on in terms of the process. But my role has really been like facilitating the project itself.
All right, thanks, Chelsea. And Véronique, over to you.
Yes, hi, I'm Véronique, and I also started working with Glen on December 1st, 2018, when he was elected. So just like Chelsea, Glen and I have been there, we're the originals. So my work in the office is more on the planning and policy piece. And so I worked on a lot of the planning applications in Stittsville, and Glen's work at committee and city council. So in terms of the Stittsville Main Street revitalization, that's the piece I look after, is city policy and that kind of stuff. And we've had a couple of seminars in person at Johnny LaRue before, and I was the person moderating the seminars. So if I see a couple of familiar names that I know have been in the in-person consultation, so you've seen me before. Like everyone else, I'm working from home, and I have a large and busy family. And so people usually apologize for children and pet barging in. I also have teenagers and young adults barging in, and they all find it very entertaining to wave to whoever I'm having a meeting with. So that's something you can expect at my end as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to have both Chelsea and Véronique here because like everything we do in my office, it's really a team effort. You know, you often see my face as the one in the Facebook videos or at council, but really everything we do involves a lot of people behind the scenes. And both Chelsea and Véronique have been very involved in this project because it's one of the most important projects for me in this term of council. And before we start, I also wanted to say we had a lot of discussions about whether or not we should even do this webinar because of everything going on with COVID-19 and the complete change of focus. And in the end, we decided to do it. We think what we've been hearing from people is you'd like a bit of a distraction from some of the bad news going on. And Stittsville Main Street will need attention after this is all over more than ever. This is really hitting our small businesses very hard. And perhaps it changes a little bit of the focus of some of our areas of what we're looking at, but I think it's really important to keep having these conversations and trying to move forward on these things. It was a huge priority for our community before COVID-19, and it will be afterwards as well. The overview for the webinar today, basically we have 3 sections. I've got a deck that'll give you a bit of an overview about our Revitalizing Stittsville Main Street project. And then we're gonna go over a little bit about the feedback we've had so far from the community, give you some highlights about some of the themes we're already hearing very consistently from everything we're doing. And then we are going to do a Q&A after that. So we mentioned earlier there is a Q&A panel. So if you do have questions, you can send them in, and then Chelsea will be helping moderate those questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We'll spend about 45 minutes to an hour total on this call. And we're also recording it, so it'll go up on YouTube and Facebook later on as well. So first big test here is if my screen share for the PowerPoint works. So I'm going to try this. Microsoft PowerPoint, share. All right, hopefully everybody sees that up on my screen. This is similar to a presentation I gave at our live workshop. So I'll just walk you through a bit of the background on this. To start with, my interest in Stittsville Main Street came probably 5 or 6 years ago at least. And as a volunteer, the day after the Parade of Lights, the annual Christmas parades, I had the opportunity to participate as a volunteer, helping to clean up all of the barricades that went up at each of the side streets. And that involved a small group of volunteers walking the length of the street, roughly from Brown's Independent all the way to the library. And so we had a truck with us and we were putting the barricades in. It was the first time that I ever had the opportunity to walk down Stittsville Main Street. And I bet most people have not really been able to do that. And for me, it was a total eye-opener about some of the good things about Stittsville Main Street, some of the bad things about Stittsville Main Street. You know, the opportunity that was there, and also, you know, maybe some of the areas that would be a bit of a struggle to get fixed. So for me, that was the first opportunity to have a really close look at Main Street. And I've been involved in a number of efforts ever since around trying to work constructively to make it a great street in our community. I remember 5 years ago, this is a picture of a public meeting around the finalization of the Stittsville Main Street Community Design Plan. So this is a major city planning exercise to try to put a bit of a framework and some thought around how the community might develop over 20 to 25 years. So that was 5 years ago, and you can kind of get a sense here, but not quite. There were easily 70 or 80 people who came to this meeting, which is a really impressive turnout. I helped organize an event 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago now, at Quitters, again on revitalizing Stittsville Main Street. We had a panel of business owners, of builders. There was someone from the city's economic development, and we had the mayor from Merrickville. We had someone from the Board of Trade, and we had a mix of businesses and residents. And again, we packed Quitters with about 50 or 60 people, everybody very, very interested in the future of the street. It was a big theme of my election campaign. These signs were going up. I remember almost being surprised at how much interest there was in Stittsville Main Street, not just from people who lived in the older neighborhoods, but from all over, even in the newer suburbs of the community as well. And then for the past few years, I've been hosting a James Walk, which is a citywide series of free walking tours. And I think this was the 4th or 5th year that I did it last May. And we had over 100 people show up, which is actually way too many for a walking tour. But I bring you all of this just to emphasize how much interest there is in this. And I know just by attending today, all of you are interested in it as well. There's so much excitement, enthusiasm, interest in helping Stittsville Main Street become something more, something really positive for our community. And we've been using this photo for the project, and I just love this photo because it says so much about the past and the present and the future of the street. And I don't know how easy it is to see my mouse, so I'll try to describe it. When you look to the in the foreground of the image here, you've got Quitter's Coffee, a 5-year-old business that I think for a lot of people is really a great example of a small local independent business and how important that can be in transforming the health and the interest in the street. If you look a little further down, Abbott Street and the Trans-Canada Trail, this is a really important recreation route. Every year we see more and more people walking and jogging and riding their bikes down that trail. A little further in the distance, you can just see the Stittsville Legion sign. The Legion is, they're looking at a major redevelopment, rejuvenization project for their property to build a really interesting mixed use building there. On the other side of the street, it's kind of hard to see, but if you can think of there's an older building with a bright red garage. At one of our workshops that we did in March, the owners of that garage showed up and they're planning to open a craft distillery there. So another really interesting, unique local business looking to set up on the street. There's the Heritage Building, the old Butler Hotel or Greens Hotel. It's now an insurance office, but this is actually the only building on the street that's officially designated as a heritage building, but it just speaks to that historical importance for the street. This spring will be the opening of the new Trailhead, which is an investment of about, I think it's close to $200,000 in doing a landscaping just to improve the west side of the Trans-Canada Trail. And then there's a for sale sign here. This property has actually been sold, and it's very early in the planning process, but there is a family who's purchased that, and they have some pretty exciting plans that I hope we'll be able to share later this spring about what they'd like to do on that property. So lots of really positive things happening on the street. So with that in mind, back in January, we published a discussion paper called Revitalizing Stittsville Main Street. And what this is, it's collecting all these ideas that our team has heard or that I've heard when I was a resident, all these ideas that people have about how we might improve the street. And we've collected that together, tried to organize them a little bit, try to identify some stakeholders, some organizations who might want to get involved. This is not a plan for Stittsville Main Street by any means. It's a starting point. It's a way to get people started on the discussion. And I think that's a really important first step. So it's broken down into 5 different areas. We've broken it down into economic development, so the health of the businesses in the community, transportation and mobility, so that's how the roads and the sidewalks function for pedestrians, for cyclists, and for people who are driving a car as well. There's beautification, so that could be things like potted plants or banners hanging, but it's also about all the street furniture and even some of the park areas that you would see eventually along the street. Activities, we already have a lot of great activities like the Parade of Lights, like Arts in the Park. We did a movie night last year at Village Square Park, so lots of opportunities for activities to bring more people to the area. And then municipal planning. So municipal planning is really the city's area. That would be around evaluating new development proposals, but also things like the infrastructure, the water and sewer, the road design, things like street lights and so on. So there's a lot of overlap too between all of these areas. They're not kind of exclusive. There's a lot of things that could fall into several of these categories. We have a few objectives by publishing this discussion paper. First and foremost, it's to engage the community. We know there's a lot of interest, but we really want people to get involved, share their feedback, and start to feel some ownership about how this plan might come together in the future. We're looking for your feedback to help prioritize ideas and initiatives. So understanding from you what's the most important to you, and what could we do that would bring the most value, have the most benefit for the community. We're trying to identify stakeholders. So something I've said a number of times is a lot of people are looking for the city to do all the work on revitalizing Stittsville Main Street. But if you look at any community that has had success in building a healthy Main Street, whether that's here in Ottawa, a street like Preston Street, or whether that's a street like in Almont, yes, the city or the municipality has a role, but it's also clear that you need a lot of other people getting involved as well. The business community, community associations, volunteers, there's all sorts of people who get involved, and we really need everyone taking part in order to end up with a great street. And then the fourth objective is City Hall advocacy. Something I've learned over the past almost year and a half at City Hall is the squeaky wheel does get attention. And we've had a lot of strong interest. We've had a lot of people filling out our survey. We have a lot of people signing up for our workshops and this webinar. And being able to go back to the city with this level of feedback really shows the planners and the staff at the city how important this is to Stittsville residents. And my team and I have also been doing a number of internal meetings as well, just to share some of these ideas and share why this is important to Stittsville and why we really want the support from city staff to move forward on this. So I mentioned the discussion paper. We are doing a webinar now. We've done a number of workshops and other smaller pop-up events, and we've been going out to different community groups and community associations to present this. We have a survey and we're collecting feedback, and all of this is going to go into a document that we call a What We Heard document. So this is a document that's going to summarize and organize all of this feedback and hopefully give us a starting point to start working towards a bigger plan. So we're going to collect all this feedback, including the feedback from this call, and publish that in a document later on this spring. We were thinking by the end of April, but with everything going on, it may be in May before we get that published. And then from there, hopefully we see enough support and enough ideas and engagement from the community that we can move forward and start to work on an actual plan for how we put some of these ideas into motion. So that's the extent of the PowerPoint, but I wanted to get into a bit of a discussion. I mentioned we've been doing all of these engagement activities, been collecting feedback for a long time now. I'm going to stop my screen share so we can go back to our panelist view here. I was wondering, just from Chelsea and Véronique, what themes have really resonated? What are some of the common comments and ideas that we see floating up to the top? Maybe we'll start with Chelsea.
Sure. So I think just to speak to the numbers, at this point, we've got almost 200 survey responses, which is awesome. And as the councillor said, that's going to remain open for the time being. So if you haven't submitted feedback yet, please do. I think probably the most dominant theme that's coming forward is looking at the transportation network and how that's functioning right now on Stittsville Main Street. So lots of concern around traffic congestion, being able to get in and out of businesses, as well as some of the smaller residential streets that connect to Stittsville Main Street. Also looking at, if we want to support a more healthy, vibrant, walkable, pedestrian-friendly, cycling-friendly street, how to better integrate infrastructure that serves, not just cars. So I think that's probably one of the stronger messages that we're getting from the community at this point. We've heard really positive feedback in terms of people are very happy to see that there are those couple of anchor small local independent businesses that are thriving and doing really well. So lots of feedback around from residents that are looking for more of that, people that don't want to see big box stores inundate Main Street, but want to see more independent retailers that they can support and walk to. So that's some of the feedback. I don't know, Vero, if you want to add to that. Oh, unmute.
There you go. I had a hard time finding the button there. No, that's it's a good summary of the feedback we've received. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I saw actually somebody I just see in the chat window open, someone had asked about Robert Grant, because when you're talking about the transportation impacts, we're talking about Stittsville Main Street here, but it really goes well beyond the street itself. And Stittsville Main Street as a transportation route, it's part of a larger network of roads and transportation connections within Stittsville. Somebody was asking about Robert Grant and what role that plays in the planning here. And Vero, I was wondering if you could jump in a little bit there about Robert Grant as the north-south arterial and how that affects Stittsville Main Street.
Yes, I was just sending, there's a couple of questions that came up asking if the paper and the discussion paper and the survey were available online. So I just sent the link to people who've asked questions in the Q&A. I've sent the link, and then I also pasted it in the chat window. So if you're looking for a link to the discussion paper and survey, it's there. Okay, yes, Robert Grant is a north-south arterial. So that's a problem with Stittsville Main Street, is that there's like a fundamental rule of making an environment that's welcoming to pedestrians and families and shoppers, is that a road cannot be welcoming to cars and pedestrians at the same time, right? And so all of us as pedestrians, if we step on the road, you know, on Hazeldean, we don't feel safe, right? Like we wouldn't cross Hazeldean willy-nilly. But I might cross my neighborhood street without, you know, caring too much. And so this is kind of like a fundamental problem with Stittsville Main Street, is that it serves Stittsville as an arterial road, which is connecting this north and south end of Stittsville. And so this is why it's Stittsville Main Street is often congested. It's acting beyond capacity. We see a lot of road rage and impatient driving, and people are not happy about waiting, is because when they hit Stittsville Main Street, they expect to be getting to the Queensway, they're on their way somewhere. And so a road whose purpose is to take you somewhere, that's an arterial road. It just connects point A to point B. And Robert Grant Road is supposed to be the north-south arterial in Stittsville. And it's way behind schedule on getting built, which leaves Stittsville Main Street as the north-south arterial. It's very hard to revitalize a street when when it serves that dual purpose. And in fact, it's impossible to serve that dual purpose. It's either going to be serving cars well or pedestrian well, right? Where those are two very different populations. And in the case of Stittsville Main Street, you could argue that it serves neither well, right? It does a poor job of being a safe pedestrian environment, and it does a poor job of moving cars from point A to point B. And so in order to make it a more, you know, more of a destination, we need to finish Robert Grant. So when Glen started working, when Glen was elected, somebody suggested very early on, why don't we close Stittsville Main Street for a weekend or an afternoon and have a street party and vendors, and it's been done in Westboro. And right away, you start thinking, well, where do we send the cars, right? So now the cars are now trickling in Crossing Bridge and into the residential neighborhoods that are around Stittsville Main Street, which makes it very dangerous for people who live there. It's not meant for that. And so in order so the answer always like, well, if we had Robert Grant, you could detour your traffic there and close Stittsville Main Street for an afternoon, or, you know, to make it. So there's a lot of revitalization initiatives that are great ideas until we get to yes, but where do we send the cars, right? And the answer to that is always Robert Grant. So this north-south arterial is, it's a road that is funded through development charges. And so when builders get to build houses, a portion of the price of every new house goes into a big citywide kitty that goes to build arterial roads, and well, in part, among other things. And this fund it's been underfunded for many years. There's several reasons why that I won't be getting into. But the point is that we have several large road projects. In Stittsville, there's some in Barrhaven and some in New Orleans. Every suburban community has a road like Robert Grant that is essential and not being built right now. And so that account is behind, and so that project is behind. But it's something that Glen has been working on hard. when we started working in December 2018, it was one of our first meeting with the roads team was about Robert Grant. And so we said, okay, so it was supposed to be built right now. Like we should be looking, where Paul Desmarais School is, it should be being built right now, and it's still very much a field. So where is it at? And then their first answer was like, oh, that's after 2031. And I can tell you, it was like the air got sucked out of the room. Like,
Yeah.
If you know Glen, he's a pretty upbeat kind of guy, and it was the first time I saw him like completely deflated, and we were like, oh my goodness, what are we gonna do? And so the whole year we've been beating every meeting we have with planning, with roads. It's always Robert Grant, Robert Grant, Robert Grant, and we've made some headway. And so part of what we've achieved with Robert Grant is that there is so either a city can build a road using tax revenues, or a developer can build a road, an arterial road. A developer can build it and then be reimbursed by the city. In order to do that, the city has to be able to pay the developer back within a 10-year window. And because of the 2031 date, Robert Grant could not be front-ended by a developer because it was more than 10 years out. And so what we've achieved this year is to bring the funding for Robert Grant within that 10-year window. And so now developers will be able to front end Robert Grant. So on the north piece near Palladium, because Robert Grant's going to be taking people right to the 417, there's one piece of Robert Grant that's going to be built there by a developer who's developing a large swath of land at 195 Huntmar, so beside and behind the police station. And then Richcraft, for instance, who's going to be developing the land where the barn currently is to Hazeldean, they would be able to front end from Paul Desmarais to Hazeldean. And then there's a third section, which is from Hazeldean to Maple Grove, to Maple Grove, to Huntmar. Which is still a bit up in the air because we don't have a clear candidate for. So I think I've said enough about Robert Grant.
Well, I was going to say it's kind of amazing because Goulburn Township started planning basically this road back in the 90s, and here we are, 25 years later, we still don't have the road built. And you're talking about, this is basically a bypass road that takes everybody in the south end of Stittsville from Fernbank Road all the way to the Queensway. Right now, the only alternative to Stittsville, Maine is, I guess you could take Westridge, which again isn't really ideal to move a large volume of traffic, or you could take that kind of Shea to Iber to Huntmar, which is not ideal. So I think that is a piece of feedback we've had consistently around Stittsville Main Street, is we've got to get Robert Grant completed so that we can take that traffic pressure off of the road. I was going to say a good example. I remember we took a field trip to Carleton Place a few months back, and you go down the main street in Carleton Place, and we had to stop our vehicle to allow someone to parallel park on the main street in Carleton Place. It didn't feel out of place, though. It didn't feel like, we weren't getting impatient because it's the kind of street it is. It's local shops. The speed of the traffic is much slower. Parallel parking was not an odd thing to do. I'd have a hard time imagining doing that on Stittsville Main Street and not have the person sitting behind me in traffic getting very impatient and upset. So Robert Grant is one way, to provide an alternative for a lot of the traffic. There's a lot of other smaller things that we need to move forward on in the meantime to turn this into a healthier street and kind of change our expectations around it. As I forget if it was Chelsea or Veto who said earlier, you can't have both a street that moves cars very quickly north and south and a street that's friendly for pedestrians and for local businesses. The two things don't really jive. They're mutually exclusive. So how do we find? I think the priority's got to be on the foot traffic and creating a road network that serves the local businesses and the local residents first, rather than the traffic that's cutting through north and south. But this is a long-term thing that we're going to keep working on. There were other things I thought of that we've heard a lot about in terms of public feedback. One was around the importance of the history and heritage. So this is a street that dates back to the 19th century, you know, the 1800s, when it was a railway town. And we've still got this core of buildings in the central part of the street, especially, that I think people are very fond of, right? It's a sense of history. It's a uniqueness. When people talk about the village feel, I think they're thinking of some of these smaller scale, traditional looking buildings. And so there's always a bit of a push and pull. How do we continue to build and adapt and grow the street, but still respect the current character of it? So that's always a challenge for the street. And I don't know, Chelsea, if you wanted to elaborate a little bit, beautification. So lots of ideas that we've heard around planting flowers or putting banners up on the posts. And you know, it's amazing how sometimes what would seem to be a really easy thing, maybe if you could explain just on those two things alone, you know, putting pots on the sidewalk or hanging banners, it gets very complicated. It gets very quickly more complicated than you'd ever think.
Absolutely. So when Glen took office, we were all like, we all share the same vision for Stittsville Main Street, and we'd heard the feedback from the community around beautification and thought like, well, that should be a fairly easy first step, right? We'll just pretty up Stittsville Main Street and then we can move forward on some of the bigger planning issues. And so some of the suggestions that we frequently hear from the community are things like replacing, you know, the Christmas stars. Maybe we hang banners in the summer months that are decorative on those traditional lampposts on the street, or hanging baskets. It's something that's not a huge investment of funds, so it would make a nice difference. People would appreciate it. And then upon further investigation, like, you realize all the barriers, right? Because Stittsville Main Street has been around for a long time, but it's nowhere near being ready for road reconstruction. So a lot of these upgrades. So if it came down to working with the street lighting team, and those traditional green lamp posts are actually like quite old, and the manufacturer isn't around anymore. And so they actually aren't, we can't get approval at this point for, you know, moving forward with hanging banners without an engineering report conducted on each and every post. So like, there are these barriers that we bump into where, you know, from an outsider's perspective, it seems like this should be very simple and easy to move forward with. And then once you actually start looking at it, we're going to have to be pretty creative in our approach. And then something like flower planters, that's a lovely idea, but we also always have to keep accessibility in mind. We don't want to, there are several sections on Stittsville Main Street where the sidewalks are already quite narrow, and that's very important to keep the community open to everybody. And so we need, like, when we look at these, there are, you know, challenges that we have to approach very, very creatively and look at other alternatives.
Yeah, and we're looking to other communities as well. We've heard a lot of feedback about, oh, you should check out this street in, I don't know, Perth or Merrickville, or, you know, people have sent in all sorts of ideas of other communities that have done a good job at rejuvenating their main streets, and in a similar scale to Stittsville. And you know, I think that's promising too, right? Things that may seem like a roadblock right now, we're starting to see examples or solutions that other communities have implemented. So it gives us a bit of optimism that we can get to where we need to be here in Stittsville. I'm just looking at the time, and I want to make sure that we leave lots of time for questions from from everyone tuned in today. Chelsea, are there any, you're looking at all the questions coming in on the Q&A panel. Any that you want to share, and we'll try to answer them?
I think at this point, most of them have been answered as we've gone along. There were quite a few questions about Robert Grant Avenue in terms of like expected completion dates and what the holdups are. There was an inquiry about COVID-19 and how people can get involved. So if you're looking to help with volunteering, by all means, reach out to our office. Send the counselor an email at glen.gower@ottawa.ca, because we can help connect you with local groups. They're just starting to come in now.
Okay. Well, on Robert Grant, because I don't think we were super clear on the current timelines, but Véronique had mentioned that it's going to be built in sections, essentially. And at this point, a lot of it depends on when the adjacent land gets developed. So probably the next section, well, there is one section being built at the north end right now, closest to the Queensway. So that's under construction. It'll be done in the next year or two. The next section will likely be the section between Abbott Street and Hazeldean. So as that land starts to be developed with homes and businesses, that section will be built. And then the section that's roughly between Hazeldean and heading north towards Huntmar, that one, we still don't have a clear timeline on that, but again, we're looking for any creative way possible, any funding. The city's in the middle of something called the Transportation Master Plan Review, and it's the Transportation Master Plan that prioritizes all of the city's projects. So there are arterial roads all over Stittsville, Canada, Barrhaven, Orleans, and there's kind of a list of when each one gets built. So as soon as one's done, they go to the next one. And we're lobbying really hard to move up the list for Stittsville. There was a survey done earlier this spring, and I was really happy to see that there was more answers from people living in Stittsville than any other ward across the city. So that's really important. When I said earlier that the squeaky wheel effect works sometimes in the city, it's really encouraging and important that when there are survey opportunities or opportunities for feedback, that people from Stittsville speak loud and clear and share their ideas. So whether it's around Robert Grant or Stittsville, Maine, or Carp Road or Fernbank or Terry Fox, we have a lot of these projects that are behind and that need to be finished. And, it's not just the roads and to move the cars, but all of these include safer pedestrian access, cycling access, bus lanes or bus routes. So it's not just about moving vehicles, it's about how do we move people effectively within and outside of our community.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions that came in the Q&A about Robert Grant. The first one was about, I think it's Mr. Sweetnam, who asked if the developer of the 15-story apartment at 1000 Robert Grant agreed to contribute to the construction of Robert Grant. And that's something to specify, is that just a couple of things that need to be clarified. The 15-story apartment has not been approved yet, and so it's not yet. But the second thing is that building an arterial road like Robert Grant is several $1 million per 200 meters or per kilometer. It's
the whole stretch will be probably over $100 million. It's
yeah.
A huge investment.
And so, like, just from Fernbank to Paul Desmarais, like, this was a $10.3 million project, I think, something like that. It was front-ended. And so, so the developer, like the 15, like an apartment building looks big, but it's still one parcel, right? Like the kind of money they're investing into developing their one parcel is not the kind of money that allows to front end an arterial road like Robert Grant. It wouldn't be asked of them to front end. Sometimes some developers are asked to front end a project because they cannot build. So 195 Huntmar, it was like, either you need to front end this road in order to be able to get out of your neighborhood, right? So in this sense, it is required of them because they cannot build neighborhood before they build a road. In the case of Robert Grant, it's not the case that they need to build it. And so, so it wouldn't be asked of them. And also it's a project that's too small for that. What we've asked them was to put a holding provision on building their apartment until Robert Grant is built. So hold off on the higher tower, which we don't know if it's going to be 15 stories or not, but we know it's going to be an apartment building. So to hold off until Robert Grant is built, but it's not going to be built by the developer of 1000 Robert Grant. That's the, somebody also had a question about the barn. So on Hazeldean, which I mentioned. I don't know, Glenn, if you want to take an update on the fate of the barn.
Yeah, well, hopefully we don't stray too far from Stittsville Main Street, but I know Richcraft is planning to submit some, how would you put it? I guess a development concept. They're getting closer to the point where they'd like to start development on the land around the barn. They are still committed to keeping the barn as part of that development, but we don't know exactly what they have in mind. So I would suspect notwithstanding this COVID-19 situation, maybe by this fall, we'll start to see some of their preliminary ideas of how that'll get integrated potentially into a new development. I'll link it to Stittsville Main Street, though. This is some trivia for you. The same designer or builder of that red barn, the Bradley Craig barn on Hazeldean Road, I believe his name was Cummins. He was also the designer and builder of the Heritage Building right at the corner of Stittsville, Main and Abbott Street. So the Butler Hotel and Greens Hotel that we had up in the picture sooner. So there's your link back to Stittsville, Main.
And we also have a question, Glenn, about the beautification of Stittsville Main Street and the look and feel of the shops and how, like, the lot fabric, the architectural style, it is a bit of a mismatch from one end of Stittsville Main Street to the next. And Tristan here is asking if there's any plan to have a style, a new build, like a form-based building code, if you will, to give a certain coherence to the style. And I thought maybe you'd want to talk to the CDP and how it works with
That's such a great question, and it's come up a number of times. And it's really interesting. If you go on Stittsville Main Street from north to south, I think you could see just about every single architectural style known to humankind, with perhaps the exception of like concrete brutalism. There's buildings from every era. There's buildings in every condition imaginable, from new and pristine to a little bit run down. And this was addressed a little bit in the community design plan that was created 5 years ago. And what they did was they divided up the street into 4 different segments. So the spot with more strip malls and big box stores in the north end, that's one precinct. Then there's a spot just south of there with the schools and some of the retirement residences. It's more of an institutional feel. Then you've got the village core, which has most of the 19th century or early 20th century buildings. And then south of that, you have another segment, another quadrant, I guess you could call it, that's got really a mix of more mid 20th century up to the present. And one thing that the community design plan was really careful in doing was not prescribing a particular style. It didn't say you have to have everything match a 19th century heritage style, because I think it recognizes that one of the things that makes Stittsville Main Street so interesting, and really any urban area, is variety. Like if you go to downtown Ottawa, or if you go to downtown New York City, any great city, you're going to see layers of different eras and architecture. And so I think it's a healthy thing for a streetscape and for a community to have some variety in the architecture. What the community design plan does do, it says that within each of those segments, though, you need to be using materials that are complementary or that are in character of the other buildings there. So there's a building that's going to start to be constructed this year. It was approved last year at 1531 Stittsville Main Street, just south of Quitters. And it is not a replica building of a 19th century building by any means, but what they were required to do architecturally and design-wise was use elements that would tie into those older buildings. So for example, using brick and stone and wood, some of those more natural materials. And the first iteration they came back with had quite a bit of glass and had a real modern feel to it. And the city planners in our office said, well, wait a second, this doesn't fit the character. It doesn't fit in with that idea of linking your materials and your design to the heritage buildings or the existing buildings that are already there. And I think that's the right approach. So I think we need to allow the street to evolve and to allow, a contemporary look to it, but not have things out of character or stick out like sore thumbs from the existing buildings.
Okay. So there's a couple more questions for us to get to here. So Patrick asked, do you think the focus of this effort of COVID will change, or do you think the focus of this effort will change after pandemic to filling a lot of vacant stores?
Well, I sure hope so. I mean, small businesses, independent businesses have been hit so hard by everything going on. I mean, I wish we had a crystal ball. We knew how long this would last for. And I wish we knew, how the recovery is going to happen, because it will end eventually. One thing we've heard a lot during this is how much people care about their local retailers. And it's real. I really struggle with hearing some of the stories of our local businesses and what they're going through right now. I'm hopeful that once we do get back to normal, that there'll just be a surge of support for these local businesses when they're able to reopen, and maybe an appreciation of how important local businesses are in the overall health of our communities. So I mean, I don't have a crystal ball on this, but based on what I've heard around the neighborhood with my friends and neighbors and people who we've been talking to on the phone over the last few weeks, I hope we will see that resurgence of support and more business going to these local and independent shops more than ever, which would bode very well for something like Stittsville Main Street. If either
Yeah.
of you want to jump in on that, please do.
Yeah, I was thinking, oops. Okay, I was thinking about along the same lines is that I think in the past we heard a lot about shop local, support local businesses, and all of us like to do a little bit, but not if it's too expensive, right? Like there's only like I'll go to Quitters and pay $6 for my coffee when I'm meeting people. That's okay. But if it comes to buying other things that are more expensive, like then I'll still go to a big retailer and so a lot of us, there's a certain pain point after which we're not really comfortable supporting local. Like the clothes are more expensive, everything, there's that. And I think that this crisis will really put us, like, through this crisis, we'll really see how close local businesses are to the community in that they will go out of business very quickly, right? And I think that, so we're used to seeing local business come in and out of business, right? And we often feel like, I remember there's some coffee shops in Stittsville that opened and then closed, and I was like, oh, maybe I should have gone there more often, but now it's gone, right? And we all have this experience, but another coffee shop comes up and we still go to Tim Hortons, right? And so, but I think that this experience of this crisis might really put us in front of all our local businesses going out of business at the same time, right? Because they don't have that much runway, and really put us in front of our choices. So that's one thing. I think it's going to be a real, there's going to be a bit of an awakening in terms of keeping our local businesses in business, through this crisis. The second thing I think, and this is maybe a bigger, broader philosophical point, is that like our business models, like in Ontario and Canada and North America, we like economies of scale, right? So we'll build one Costco and the whole of Stittsville and Canada will shop at this one place. And then you come with something like social distancing and it's like, oh my goodness, now we have 120,000 people to accommodate in this one location in a situation where we cannot have crowds, right? Whoops. Our entire business model is predicated on large schools where a lot of kids go, right? Then by bus. And so all of a sudden you get social distancing and your kids can't walk to school. Your schools are huge, so you need to close it down because you can't bus them because right? Yeah. And then all the stores are like, whoa, now we need lineups because we need to let people in one at a time. And something I'm hoping comes out of this crisis is a recognition that smaller local, right? If all our children could walk to a smaller school, maybe our schools wouldn't be closed right now, could be more manageable, right? Maybe if we could all walk to a neighborhood grocery stores, we wouldn't have this crowd management issue that we have right now. Maybe if we could,
I was going to say, that's a good way to bring in the official plan process that we have going on right now. So the city's updating the official plan, which is the master document that says how the city will grow and operate. We've got 1 million people in Ottawa now. We'll be going to 1.5 million within a few years and 2 million beyond that. One of the key ideas in that official plan is around creating 15-minute neighborhoods. So neighborhoods that you can walk to the amenities that you need in under 15 minutes. We're a long way from that in Stittsville right now. But if you think about how can we develop in the future so that we have a school within 15 minutes, a grocery store within 15 minutes, a doctor, a coffee shop, all of the amenities. And I actually think Stittsville Main Street is really ideally situated to be the anchor for that community here in Stittsville. We've got to make some better links with to some of the newer communities and with cycling and walkability. But exactly what you're talking about is how the city is framing the work with the official plan right now. So we're in a good position to take advantage of that new approach to how we build our communities.
We also have a question about safe cycling and making other road alternatives to Stittsville Main Street, because Stittsville Main Street is currently not a practical road to use on a bike. You and I, Glen, we've biked up and down Stittsville Main Street. It's not a pleasant experience. I know that, I think a lot of us can bike in parallel to Stittsville Main Street on safer roads. That being said, on local roads, neighborhood streets, I think at some point, if we're biking, we do need to access to the street, right? So I know that my children, I live in Greenwich Ridge, so I'm about 1 kilometer, maybe a little bit more from Quitters through the Trans-Canada Trail. And my children love to go to Quitters and JoJo's ice cream truck in the summer. So they're safe going up the Trans-Canada Trail to Quitters, but they still need to take Stittsville Main Street. So even if we make parallel bike paths on local roads, we still need the road to be safe, even for short distances. I know that when they're biking from Quitters to JoJo's, it terrifies me, right? Like they're on the sidewalk, if they fall and there's a bus, it's very worrisome. So it's not just to paint the bike lanes, because paint is not infrastructure, but it's also to calm down the traffic, to make it welcoming to slower traffic, like bikers, like families, like pedestrians.
Well, maybe Chelsea, as our office expert when it comes to safety for pedestrians and cyclists and motorists too, I'm thinking of there's a few things you've been working on already working on proactively around safety. Do you want to touch on a couple of those things?
Yeah, so a couple of things at our office. Probably the biggest thing that we're hoping to move forward, not entirely clear on a timeline yet, is a pedestrian crossover on Stittsville Main Street. So the location of that, the detailed design hasn't been completed at this point, but it would be probably central between Abbott Street and Carlton Cathcart, like somewhere in the middle. The feedback that we got from the community when we circulated an update about that was that initially it was proposed to be quite a bit closer down to Orville Street, and people said, well, there's already signals there, and there's such a gap in the pedestrian network. There's not a safe place for pedestrians to cross. So that will be really positive. And the one really nice part about pedestrian crossovers is that, I mean, obviously it increases safety and accessibility for pedestrians, but beyond that, we hear a lot of complaints from residents that live on Bray or trying to turn left out of Orville as well. Anybody turning left on a Stittsville Main, it's very difficult. So having the PXO in place will help to hopefully break up the traffic flow a little bit. Another initiative that we're working on, which is a little bit longer term, is trying to move heavy truck traffic off of Stittsville Main Street, because it's obviously not at all an enjoyable experience right now as a pedestrian, or to sit out on some of the locations on Main Street have a little bit of frontage where potentially a patio could be put in the future, but the heavy truck traffic really takes away from any type of atmosphere or ambiance on the Main Street. But again, that links back to Robert Grant Avenue. So we continue to work on it. Trucks need to be able to access the community at some point. So it's just trying to find an alternate north-south route for them.
I was going to say, as there's new developments on Stittsville Main Street, one of the things that they have to do is provide a wider space for sidewalks. So I mentioned the new development at 1531 Stittsville Main. They had to provide the city with more space at the edge of their property so we could have a wider sidewalk. So you're going to see, as the street evolves and continues to get built out, you're going to see better pedestrian facilities. Unfortunately, the street is quite narrow in some spots, so it's going to be easier to do that in some areas of the street than others. But also looking at the cycling infrastructure and how that can be integrated as the rest of the street gets upgraded.
We have a question here too from Kathy about attracting new business to the street and to have the business so that people come to the street. And so So that's an interesting question, and it really speaks to business leadership on the street. For instance, the city doesn't build stores, right? We can zone for commercial activity, we can facilitate it, but we can't necessarily we can't make people build a certain kind of business. I know that in a conversation Glen and I had with some business owners on Stittsville Main Street who were saying, like, talk to your friends, because I really don't mean to dig onto the insurance business, but there's a lot of insurance business on Stittsville Main Street. Is this because Stittsville needs more insurance than anyone else? No, it's because business people, they have contact. I have my business here. It works well for me. So the other buddy's like, oh, why don't I come here too? You know, oh, like, so if you have a main street that has just dentists or just physios or just insurance, it's not necessarily because your business needs are that much greater. It's often because business people know each other. And so if you see a successful business insurance business on the street and you're an insurance provider, you're like, well, I'm going to go there, it seems to be. So there's a lot to be said for business leadership and for businesses. Like, if you have a microbrewery and you know a restaurateur, talk to your friends, like bring the funky little restaurants next to the microbrewery. And because that's something that, there's a lot of things that the city wishes it could do but can't. And there are things that are clear out of the city's hands. And what kind of business will open where? None of us would like to be compelled to open a certain kind of business, right? And so you cannot compel a business to open in a certain place. And the city certainly cannot, like, the zoning is a very broad tool, right? So we can say, well, you cannot have a scrap yard. You cannot have, like, it's big ideas. Like, you cannot have something smelly and noisy here, right? But in the non-smelly and non-noisy category of businesses, there's a range, right? That goes from a nail salon to a microbrewery. So this speaks to the business leadership part of it, and we have a Stittsville Business Association, and that's definitely part of their advocacy is to bring new business to the neighborhood and make it a welcoming business environment. So
well, I think about what we can do, and I see that as one of my roles as a counselor, is to be, a real cheerleader and ambassador for Stittsville and making sure people know what's happening here. We've got a great scene. I think we're only a couple of restaurants away from having a really interesting restaurant scene around the street. Once you have that critical mass, it can attract a lot of other ones, like Beto was saying. And the other thing is residents have a lot of roles to play too. If you would like to see independent local businesses, go out and support them and encourage your friends and family to do the same. If you've got visitors from out of town, bring them out for a shopping trip on the street. We might not have the core or the mass there that we need right now, but we're at the start of something. And the more that residents can support with their dollars, the businesses who have established themselves and invest in the street, the more that'll keep them healthy, and the more that they'll attract other people. We're at a great advantage right here in Stittsville because we have about 35,000 people now. We're going to be growing to over 50,000, maybe 60,000 people in the next 10 to 15 years. That's a great base of shoppers and supporters for whether you're a store, whether you're a restaurant. So it's a great place just from a economic point of view, from a market point of view. There's a lot of people here who could potentially support the businesses.
Yeah, we have a question from Liam about offering Voss Trailer a piece of land somewhere off Stittsville Main Street. And that speaks also to, we can't really make them move there, even if we were offering them land. But to speaking to the park and walk piece of it, is that there is a city parking lot next door that nobody uses. Right. And doesn't even know is there. So we already have that parking lot on Stittsville Main Street to park and walk. And it's on the same size as Voss Trailer. It's literally next door to Pretty Pots.
Yeah, and there's a lot of large lots, some of them occupied, some of them empty. And again, just points to the opportunity. We're already seeing, we have a meeting at least once a month, sometimes twice a month, with another investor or developer who's interested in doing something on the street. And so it gives me a lot of optimism that we're going to see some really interesting stuff happening over the next few years.
I think just to add to that too, we've focused a lot on what the challenges are, and there certainly are a lot of challenges when it comes to revitalizing Stittsville Main Street, but there's so much opportunity, and we really do have a great sense of community here. You see, like, anytime that there's a community event, we host a movie night, or JoJo's has a family fun day, or people are there. Like, people are looking for that sense of community and for an opportunity to get out and enjoy their community. And I think that we're really well positioned, and we've heard from, our office has heard from so many service groups that have stepped up and said, we want to have a part in this. We want to work on beautifying Main Street, or we've got volunteers and we do fundraising. What can we do with this revenue to contribute to, acknowledging the history of Stittsville Main Street? So there's lots of different stakeholders, and the community really does care and is engaged. It's just facilitating that, hopefully, like bringing people together. And yeah, there will be obstacles, but I think we can still accomplish a lot, even in the short term. I know one of the comments, I think, from Kathy earlier was like, it's a little bit discouraging because so many of the things that we're talking about, like Robert Grant Avenue, they're off in the future. But even right now, in terms of, the businesses that are on Stittsville Main Street are thriving, right? Like, especially the ones that serve cyclists that are using the Trans-Canada Trail. You go to Quitters in the summer and there's more bikes parked on the bike racks than there are cars in the parking lot. So I think their success is going to be what draws new businesses in as well. So I know that there's a lot of challenges, but I think too, we should stay optimistic, because as Glenn said, like, we're kind of just on the cusp, right? Like, a couple of more businesses and it's going to change the makeup of the street, and we're in a good place.
Yeah, this is we're actually at our hour, so that's probably a great note to end it on. I did want to mention what can you do if you're listening on this call? Is there something you can do right now? And there is. You can go to our website. It's glengower.ca/Stittsville, Maine. Maybe Chelsea or Veto, if one of you could type that into the chat box there so people have it.
It's been shared already.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
There's a survey there that you can take. Now, officially, the survey, we were going to end it on March 31st, but we've extended it for another few days. So take that survey and share your feedback, or you can send an email to my team. That's either way. Let your friends and neighbors and family know about it. If they care about Stittsville Main Street and they have some ideas, we want to hear from them too. So share the link and share the survey with them. I want to say a big thanks to Chelsea and Veto for participating in the panel, and for everyone who tuned in and all the great questions and great feedback. This was our test here of the webinar, and I think it went pretty well. We're going to post it to YouTube and Facebook later too, so we'll get some more audience through that. We are going to do some more of these webinars, not necessarily about planning in Stittsville Main Street, but talking to the head of the Western Ottawa Community Resource Center. We're trying to get someone from Ottawa Public Health who might be able to answer some of the questions about COVID-19. So stay tuned for that. Sign up for my email newsletter if you can. There's a link on my website, and also on my Facebook page and on YouTube. I've been doing a daily update video, usually like under 5 minutes, just the most important things from a local perspective that you should know about the emergency situation, but also, how the community is responding and everything else going on. And I think I'll wrap it up there. And thanks everyone. This is a great first webinar, and I'm looking forward to seeing you for our future weeks. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.